Thank you, Jill. Good morning. We're here, as John said, in one iconic theater. We're only a few blocks from another one, the one that hosts Hamilton, a show seen by more than 4.5 million people. The story of Hamilton is a story of who lives, who dies, and who tells your story. Throughout the whole show is woven the question of the burden of the fact that what you do every day will be assessed by history. That's really our call to action here today. We're at a historic point in an important story of medicine, as you just heard. This is not another new gadget, another new way of putting devices in people and seeing what happens. This is a major new innovation at the intersection of medicine, at the intersection of neuroscience, at the intersection of immunology, and at the intersection of technology. This is a big deal. Innovation itself, right, has a lot of definitions. I don't like the fact that the word itself has been sort of hijacked by Wall Street, because every time you see the word innovation now in the newspaper, it has to do with profit. Innovation is much more important than that, especially in what we do in medicine. Innovation, I like to think of it as the 3 Ds: discovery, development, and deployment, because that's what our patients want. The discoveries they can read about in the newspaper, the development they can hope their stockbroker picks the right investments, the deployment is what they need. And that is, in fact, the gap that has to be bridged now. John referenced the obstacles we face. Let's break that down bit by bit. Discovery. My colleagues and I at the Feinstein Institute here at Northwell have spent the last 25 years nailing the mechanism of action that looks into how signals traveling in the vagus nerve, one fiber at a time, can downregulate cytokine storm, can downregulate the amount of inflammatory damage that occurs in animals, from mice to rats to dogs, and, as you'll hear in a minute, also in people. We understand the mechanisms at the level of individual neurons, starting in the brain and traveling down to the immune system. We understand how these signals work, arguably better than we understand how many drugs work. Check the box for discovery at many levels, thanks to the work of first dozens and then hundreds, if not thousands, of scientists and investigators, not just at Northwell, but now doing experiments that have been replicated around the world. Discovery. Development required a new device. It required a path through regulatory approval to demonstrate that this could be done in humans safely and with effectiveness. Enter SetPoint, a startup company spun out from here in 2007. SetPoint has spent 18 years and hundreds of millions of dollars, again, with at first dozens and potentially hundreds of people working the project from all different angles to invent a new device that's about the size of a multivitamin that can be implanted on the vagus nerve in the neck of patients with too much inflammation. Patients with conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, and potentially other conditions like multiple sclerosis that we'll talk about in a minute. As I said, beginning in 2007, this project started as a development project, the second D in innovation. The people that did that work, the expertise they brought to these questions spanned the field from biomedical engineering to clinical trial design to recruiting patients and strategies for actually getting patients to go into the clinical trials, to having a financial strategy and plan to have investors organized and coordinated to pay for the entire effort years before it was finished. That development phase culminated happily, as many of you know, maybe all, about 6 weeks ago with FDA approval. of this idea and this device. That's right. It's okay to clap. Thank you. And now there is a label on this idea from the FDA. There is a soft launch occurring as we speak, targeting patients with rheumatoid arthritis who, frankly, are demanding this. We know this already because 24,000 rheumatoid arthritis patients tried to enroll in SetPoint's clinical trial that had about 250 openings. This wasn't they just clicked on a link and looked at it. They filled out the form. 24,000. Who does that? People don't do that unless they really want something new. So what are they trading off here? Well, they're trading off injecting themselves with drugs that cost $100,000 a year and work half the time and cause immunosuppression and have black box warnings, which means you can get cancer or sepsis or die from those things. They're trading off that for a surgical incision 1.5 inches long in the neck to implant a chip device the size of a multivitamin that is comparable in many ways on a safety message to devices that have been used for 40 years to treat epilepsy and depression and have been put in hundreds of thousands of patients, and we know it can be safely done, and we know it doesn't cause immunosuppression. So that's where we are today. We're at a major tipping point. I won't dive into the science, although my friends here know that I'm dying to. But suffice it to say that what we've learned about this not only laid the roadmap for developing this device for rheumatoid arthritis, it actually lays a broader roadmap for developing other devices that target other nerves to treat other conditions. Again, as John alluded to in his opening remarks. So where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us at a point in history that is potentially completely disruptive. Completely disruptive. It will disrupt on at least three fronts, and let's talk about that because that's where we are. And frankly, that was the dream of convening this meeting when Murthy and Mike Dowling and I had dinner about 1.5 years ago and talked about the importance of the final D of the deployment, because without deployment, the patients don't get what they want. The first front in this is to acknowledge the clinical difficulties. Look, in the history of medicine, every truly pioneering advance faced skepticism, resistance, and pushback, whether it was Semmelweis discovering hand washing and proving it with statistics, and then him unfortunately being jailed by his colleagues who accused him of disrupting their practices. They literally had him jailed for alcoholism and drug use, which was very questionable, and he died in jail. That's the guy that discovered hand washing. And of course, 20 years ago, doctors were still not washing their hands until everyone started putting cameras in the nursing stations. So change is hard on the clinical front. It's not because there's no bad people in any of this story, by the way. It's just people are people. People get into workflows. They get into habits. They get into things they're comfortable with. And on the other side of it, I personally don't want my doctor chasing every shiny new object. I want a little thought going into everything and a little care and a little conservative analysis. So as change makers and stakeholders and pioneers, which we all represent here, we have to acknowledge the reality of that, but we also have to deal with the obstacles and knock them down. So that requires building new things. At Northwell, under John's leadership, before he was CEO and now continuing, thankfully, with him as CEO, we built a new clinical center for bioelectronic medicine to do this, to actually enroll patients into clinical protocols navigated by a patient navigator to guide them through these new steps, to help the rheumatologists talk to the neurosurgeons, something that, frankly, there's not a long history of doing that. Why would there be? And to begin to deal with the other two fronts that are potential obstacles that have to be overcome. Reimbursement. Reimbursement is rewarded is embedded into repetition, not transformation. It's completely new game. Now, everybody can understand the economics in 3 minutes, which is $100,000 a year for a drug, maybe 75 every year for 30 years or 20 years, however long the patient has to take it, versus 50 or 75 grand once for life for a surgery. Who wants A if you're paying? Nobody. Everybody gets it. So now you start the process, and you get into the first couple of patients that have been implanted at Northwell, and it's like, yeah, that's great, that's great. No, we're not paying. Every medical center and insurance company will go through this until we create a roadmap to knock down the obstacles and solve the problem. And it starts with things like this, where you have representatives from insurance, you have representatives from pharma, you have hospitals, you have researchers, you have clinicians, you have startup companies coming together because it's our shared problem. This isn't the insurance company's problem. This isn't the hospital's problem. And the solution is it's what the patients want, and it's what they deserve. Why do we do what we do? We do what we do to help these people. Can we help all of them? No, of course not. Is this going to, I'm not selling snake oil. I'm not selling anything. This won't work in 100% of people, but the data are it'll work in a lot of them, 75, 80%. And it's what they want. We need to figure out how to knock down those barriers so they at least have the option. And that really leads to the third front that we have to fight on, which is cultural. It is a cultural change. It's a historic change. It's something that requires doctors to learn new words. Most physicians and nurses and other practitioners haven't what they know about the vagus nerve in most cases they get on social media. It's billions of web impressions on social media. It's a very hot thing. And I wrote a book, and you can read it. I got my plug in. I think there's going to be copies available somewhere later. I wrote the book for these reasons. This knowledge, we need a new knowledge base, we need a new dialogue, we need a new understanding of the importance of these problems. And so one of the chapters in the book is FAQs. And I'll tell you point blank, the questions are for the patients to ask their doctors, and the answers are for the patients and the doctors. So that kind of cultural change, we have to embrace it. You know, I'm telling the story up here about the vagus nerve and rheumatoid arthritis and set point and Northwell. Just scale this story and look forward 5 minutes, 5 months, 2 years, 5 years. We already have data that approaches like this will have clinical benefit in inflammatory bowel disease, animal models of multiple sclerosis, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and then other devices, not necessarily vagus nerve stimulator, for Alzheimer's, for Parkinson's, for paralysis, for rehabilitation from stroke, for withdrawal from opioids. The last two were FDA approved. So this is a new world where technology, devices, are going to not replace all drugs. That's what the reporters like to say and the journalists like to say. They will replace some drugs, I predict. And they will supplement many drugs, but they're not, the pharmaceutical industry is not completely threatened by this because they're going to invest in this. The pharmaceutical industry leaders will tell you that their business is inventing therapies and supporting the development of therapies. And that's what's going to happen. And some of that's actually starting already. You're seeing major investments in these ideas from pharma. So I'll close with where I began. You are the stakeholders here and the change makers. And together we have a common mission to write a history that will be looked at by not only our friends and family who know us here today, but by all the millions of patients that we're going to affect with what we do and how we do it. We got to knock those obstacles down. Thank you.